live. Tonight, I'm going to tell you the secret to unlocking intuitive superpowers, up to and including precognition. And it's not, for parlor tricks. This is how we can, I don't want to say manifest our dreams, but something along those lines. And it's not woo. At this point, with the caveat that it is hedged on a lot of pretty theoretical frontier science, it's not fringe science either. We're talking about Dr. Michael Levin's work, Dr. Jonathan Schooler, and it all maps so well, not only to my own experience, but this framework that I've been describing forever, I guess. But in the sense that if you transpose the architectural blueprint and the dynamical blueprint to pretty much any system, it still fits perfectly. And you'll see why that matters as we get into it. So, yeah, we're going to watch this video in a bit of Jonathan Schooler, an interview he did on, I guess it's Essentia. He is a co-author of the now theory of consciousness, the nested observer window theory. And you guys are just going to be blown away by this. So for those of you that might be new, I'll offer some context. Basically, I came into this world knowing what my purpose was. As young as I can remember, I've had one train of thought going through my mind, and it all orbits around building an ontological bridge between science and I don't even want to say spirituality, but something like that. And I was always completely convinced that it was possible, that a lot of the phenomena that science kind of dismissed just because it didn't have a mechanism, did have mechanisms, and I could tell that science was kind of in a position where it couldn't go any further without running into this stuff to spite itself. It's like Oppenheimer said, I think, the first sip of the natural sciences will make you an atheist, but at the bottom of the glass, God is waiting. And speaking of God, you will notice as we progress through this, that this nested observer window model with its apex intelligence, that all of the experiential data basically is being funneled up to, and then it can zoom in on an individual window and grant it more access to information in the system. Sounds a lot like God bestowing favor on people, right? And it very well may be that, that what we're actually talking about is God in systems theory jargon. Okay, that's fine. But the way that I kind of deal with that is that, like the Buddha told one of his students who asked him if there was a God, that's not the point right now. Suffering, you need to worry about that. Worry about God when you meet him. And what I mean by that is that the fairy tale sky god religions are obviously completely batshit insane, and they're not good, and they cause a lot of problems. Period. End of story. They are engineered for control. They are, designed to create ontological gridlock and to inculcate priors that allow people to sustain cognitive dissonance and ensure that they're going to engage selective perception. Because a person that can set their own compass can't be ruled. They don't need to be. And that you guys will see how true that is by the time we get through this. So the framework that I'm offering, I guess, with this clear sense of purpose, I discovered over the years that I had intuitive abilities that they've been described as anomalous by, Dr. Diane Hennessy, the telepathy tapes lady. I just had an exchange with her. It's definitely not in my head at this point, long story short. And I also noticed pretty quickly that these intuitions could only be trusted if they were directly aligned with my purpose. And that is absolutely essential to all this, right? So I was already determined to find these mechanisms that would prove teleology. That's the most important first step, right? That we establish that we're not actually living in a blind, dumb, random universe where some gobbledygook has somehow randomly assembled itself into all this complexity. That's patently absurd, and science is acknowledging that at this point, right? So once I had experiences that I could no longer deny were objectively, file under non-ordinary cognition, I guess over the last year or so, I've really been able to find the mechanisms and offer a framework that builds this bridge that I intended to build since childhood. It's crazy. And by the way, I'm not trying to take credit for this because it's extremely derivative. There are lots of other people converging on the same thing at this very moment. And the way that that's happening actually confirms the framework that I've been describing, because we're not just converging on the same thing. The same words come out of our mouths at the same time because of this entrainment and this resonant coupling with higher apex windows, which you'll understand better in a moment. So let me check in with the chat, make sure audio and everything is good. I'm a little bit concerned because we do have some weather, and I really don't want this stream to be reposted with a bunch of drop frames. My internet gets bad when it's raining. So if that starts happening, please let me know in the chat so I can just stop and reschedule this for Saturday. But I promise you guys, this is going to be insane. And I'm so happy to have arrived at this juncture, because it's been a long, confusing, and hard road to get here. And, it's like I was either going to hit a dead end and have to admit to myself that I had just gone off the rails or something, and you know what I mean? And there's no plan B for me. So it was either things work out and it turns out to be, of substance, this, what I call invisible thread I've been following my whole life. You know what I mean? It was like, there's no gray area really. And, it's looking like things are panning out. And that's not just important for me, because what this crossroads really represents is, if we go one way, we will have the closest possible thing to utopia. There will be no more suffering than is unavoidable due to the system's parameters. And our ability to express ourselves creatively and, just thrive and realize the expression of maximum human potential. Or we're going to get subjected to de-emphasis and de-evolution artificially by some billionaire transhumanist lunatics. That's where we're at. And that is how the system works. Of course, that's where we're at. That's the only way that those circumstances could be potential. They have to be juxtaposed equally and oppositely. Okay, so let's check out this little bit of this interview. I'm not going to play the whole thing. And I'll pause it to interject to kind of elucidate certain things and offer experiences of mine that might be relevant.
And we just have that block universe, or we have all this, and it's going through us. We have some degree of freedom, and that you have those two ontological categories. Where are you metaphysically? What do you think is most plausible?
You know, I have to say that I feel more aligned with the kite of consciousness moving through the subjective dimension of these three dimensions of time than I do with respect to how to categorize it within the, is it idealism, is it dualism? It's clearly not material reductionism. It's very clear that I'm giving consciousness, it's putting it on equal footing with reality. I think that in many ways it's sort of best characterized as a panpsychist model, because basically every individual window has some consciousness and is steering in some way. And notice when you have the window metaphor, that when you're looking out, your experience is basically of the experience of all the lower level windows. So really sort of the reality that you're experiencing is the sort of the filtered reality experiences of these lower level pixel windows, which are then lower level pixel windows. So there's kind of, it's almost idealist in the sense that all of reality that you're experiencing is corresponding to these lower level windows of experience and lower level windows of experience. So
I maybe I should have started back a little bit further, but it's basically distributed intelligence, right? And the idea is that there are observer windows at all scales, possibly down to the Planck scale. If the observer effect is real, this would actually help explain why emergent complexity is a bottom-up process, because these observer windows are organizing starting at the subquantum level. And then they sort of like form constellations and integrate information as they go up. And this is really similar to Michael Levin's biological model of light cone systems, right? Except it's not just a biological model. He starts with particles, saying that they're the most fundamental form of intelligence. And, the temporal parameters of the system components determine the size of the light cone, like what their their morphological space allows, so as you go up to bacteria, you have a bigger light cone, and you go up to a person, and then civilizations and beyond. That's the thing. And so in this model, we start with observers that I guess are particles, or just the field itself. And then those scale up and scale up and scale up. And then what we call God would be the apex window, right? So
I think it's sort of a nuanced, it also has a dualist element too, because each window has got some control in terms of how it shifts as objective time is moving past it. So it's got a dualist component, it's got an idealist component, it's got a panpsychist component, and it's grounded in imagining how, for example, these windows might be instantiated in neural circuitries in the brain. So it relates to some of the materialistic models, and hopefully has elements that could be tested, but it gives subjectivity an ontological reality that is not in the material reductionist views.
Yeah, I think it's very interesting. And we had, for instance, Stuart Hameroff at this conference referencing your model, suggesting that microtubuli or neurons might have some level of consciousness, and then if we zoom out sort of in this nested observer windows, we get to our apex or our ego consciousness. But of course, in panpsychism, you have what is called the combination problem. How exactly, by what mechanism do those consciousnesses build up? What's their boundary? And why does my consciousness stop here and why not there? What are your thoughts there?
Yeah, so I have a paper with Tam Hunt, which we call the easy part of the hard problem, which addresses this combination problem. And the solution that seems to be very intuitive to me is synchrony. So basically, the idea is that the lower level windows, each individual window, it's having its experience by, it combines by having resonance where all the parts are happening at the same time. And so those lower level, those windows are synchronized, and that produces a combined experience. And then as you move up, the other windows are now able to sort of synchronize the rhythms of the lower level windows. And so the apex is basically, as we build up these, in the same way that if you can imagine the lower level windows combining into larger windows combining into larger windows, each one of those windows has its own frequency. And so the frequency of an individual window creates the binding for that window, and that then basically enables for a sort of compression of information at that level, which presents it to the next level. And so the apex then is having a bound experience, which is due to synchrony of the lower level windows and lower level windows and lower level windows. And the way that the windows communicate with each other, the way sort of the rhythms move their way up and down is, and this is in the Now model with Justin Riddle, is through cross-frequency coupling. So there's sort of harmonies between the lower level windows and windows up, and that allows for the conveying of information up and down the system. So I think that essentially resonance and the coupling between different resonance systems allow the low-level elements to integrate into larger and larger elements.
Okay, so did I pause it? When I talk about how a person that knows their true purpose is aligned with a larger purpose. Like, this is how I used to talk about it over the years. You know, if you go back years on my channel, whenever I addressed, like, why did I have these intuitive abilities, I always explained it just based on my intuitive guessing, I guess, that it was because I knew my true purpose, and in aligning my actions with that purpose, I was just sort of organically aligned with a larger collective will. These days, I would say that I was a coherent node in an entropic field in a holographic information system where meaning is architectural. This actually explains synchronicities and why they function as sort of architectural set points in Levin's biological model. There's sort of these information distribution hubs, I guess, that are like second order attractors that send the downstream information from the global attractor to the rest of the system to tell it what to do. So I don't know why I was born like that. There's still a lot of mysteries here. But a person who has awakened, we could also say they're self-realized. And in like systems theory terms, we could say that they're a coherent node. That's why I'm not influenceable by propaganda or anything, really, you know? We are just coherent. And it doesn't, I'm not, this doesn't necessarily translate to like Buddha-like enlightenment or something. It's just coherence, right? So my job, eventually I figured out that music is the way to entrain consciousness. And we're not talking about like, I know the truth and I'm going to telepathically put it in people's heads with music. It's just coherence. Another way to think about this is that recently, I think it's John Hopkins or something, they discovered that Fibonacci or golden ratio based oscillations in ultrasound can reduce decoherence and increase coherence in the brain. So what that looks like in terms of like phase transition of information is that untruth is just going to get like dissolved by interference, and truth is going to become more structurally coherent. It may be difficult to process that if you still think truth is subjective. It's not. At least universal truth and like dynamic and architectural truth, you know? So truth is like architectural on the energetic level, you know? It's basically an algorithm, and all bullshit is like interference patterns. So, for example, I really got set on my path when I realized what the Grateful Dead was. I never saw them live. I saw like the after, you know, some offshoot, but I still got it. I understood what was happening. And I understood that when they went into these collective trances, that there was like a collective mind meld, and that I didn't have the language back then, but it entrained with whatever was highest. And then when people are set back down, they don't go quite as low as they were before. Recently, Grateful Dead, you know, during those collective improvisation peaks were analyzed mathematically, and they found golden ratio proportions, not just in the parts of the individual instruments, but in the relationships between all of them, which is impossible to do deliberately. That was definitely not conscious. And so if you think about this ultrasound therapy research, suddenly the Grateful Dead as a gnosis-inducing influence, you know, makes sense on a scientific level. Like, we understand why that happened. Right? So one of the things you'll see if you watch my videos or read my Substacks is that, like, one of the foundational principles of all this is that the true metaphysical, like the golden metaphysic, is derived from observation of natural principles and systems. Right? So, for example, in a universe that is a holographic information system, when you have a synchronicity, like for me, 3 people died that I had interacted with from the Grateful Dead in the interim between when that happened and now. And I was thinking about it one day, and I thought, well, it's not like I'm so important that the universe is like, you know, killing people off in a certain order to punctuate my storyboard or something, but it's not unconnected either. And in a holographic information system, both things can be true. It's not directly causal, you know, caused by the person. But it's also true that the architecture of the universe is acknowledging the individual. This lifts us up out of nihilism, the individual, but also doesn't promote ego inflation because of the context. And this thing of being a coherent node that can lift consciousness, the real magic happens when you're in a trance, and it's got nothing to do with you. The organizing principle that is mind takes over. And it's true that when I play music, when I get into that place, I mean, I've literally come to on stage, no drugs, looking around, not knowing where I was. I look over, my amp's almost fallen over. It was like on a stand, you know, it's like half knocked over. My mic is out in the audience, whole mic stand. I'm drenched in sweat, and I'm looking at my hands. They're still playing, and I'm looking at them, and I'm going, what the hell's going on? Why are all these people in my bedroom? That was the first thought I had when I saw the people. And then I felt the sweat, and I'm like, oh my God, I'm all wet too. And as soon as I realized what was happening, I made a mistake, and I had to take over consciously because I broke that flow state, right? What I'm getting at here is it's not the individual. It's the collective mind. You know what I mean? And when you extrapolate the philosophical implications of these models, it is both empowering and humbling simultaneously and exactly equally, because it's balanced. And that's how you know it's truth. right? So was that all I was getting at there? I mean, we could talk about how synchronicities are higher order symmetries, experiences and observation of higher orders of symmetry. It's like the symbol expresses across domains so that its essence is projected in 3D, right? In various ways. There's symmetries of form and function. There are symmetries of, form and function is good enough. Like the male archetype and the shape and function of their genitals. You know, and these are actually indications of teleology in the universe. We actually have recently determined that the mind actually does connect things in like metaphor, which is what really holographically projected, in different domains that exists as a physical property in the world. And I'm kind of going too far off down a rabbit hole. If you check out my stuff on Calabi-Yau manifolds and D-branes and how they are the translation layer, where the ideal becomes actual at the subquantum level, there's a lot better explanation than I'm going to offer right now about this metaphor as indication of mind, teleology, basically. A great example is light and gold. That was the original, those were my test subjects for this theory or whatever. And what I framed it as, I guess, is that if there is a gold and light have a bunch of weird connections to consciousness in particular. And I was trying to think of how we would ever determine whether there was a universal mind or not. So I came up with this Calabi-Yau D-brain thing, and then found out that it actually existed a couple weeks later. And I also conjectured that the way to connect these things would be this geometric resonant scaffolding that particles are sort of hung on, and that when things had this metaphorical connection, that geometric resonance would be the same. The Langlands proof published that this thing is a real thing that they had found, even using the same language that I did, which was geometric resonant, or geometric resonance that is more fundamental than particles. That's the line that exactly how I phrased it came out of the Langlands guy's mouth a bit later. And since then, resonant connections between light and gold have been established. Like, one of the issues I thought of was that if light is moving too fast, we're not going to be able to scan it for this resonance. And like a week after I thought that that's a problem, somebody made a fifth state of matter out of light and then scanned it, found this resonance, and gold has it too. And a couple of weeks ago, the connection between light and consciousness, or cognition at least, and gold was proven in a laboratory. So, what I'm getting at with those things is just that there's a lot more support, I guess, for this framework than I can almost believe. Anyways, I'm starting to ramble a little bit, but it's difficult to talk about this because there's so much, and it just expands in every possible direction. Anywhere you want to go with it. You know why? Because it's a hologram.
Very interesting stuff. Just associatively, I link it to sort of having previously interviewed this week Anirban Bandyopadhyay, who has done sort of measurements on, who's now been able to sort of measure frequencies in microtubule, and they are in the megahertz, if I can remember correctly, whereas with EEG we are much lower frequencies. All to say that the idea of resonance and even music, like that's the metaphor to understand it, right?
Exactly.
Like high frequencies being.
He goes right to music and reminds me of why I started on that rant in the first place. Being a coherent node and the apex window, knowing that society is about to hit a bifurcation manifold or a symmetry threshold, which basically means chaos, solvet coagula, right? It's going to destabilize so it can reconfigure. It has to. My job was to go out and warn people and also help them to achieve coherence. And again, this isn't about going out and preaching or, there's no dogma here. It's about helping people to fully realize themselves for themselves and in themselves by exposing them to this resonant coherence, right? And when you are aligned with the universal algorithm, I call it, you're balanced in terms of self-interest and collective interest. So I used to get giddy thinking that if I did get, big as a musician, I could go and find cool people in San Francisco and just hand them $20,000, like that's the kind of thing I looked forward to. I could have paid academics to start working out all of these things I had in my head 15 years ago. You know what I mean? I had utility within the system for the collective goal state. And that is why I had access to these cognitive superpowers and intuitions and whatnot. For those of you that don't know, by the way, I also had imposter syndrome and self-sabotaging tendencies. And, despite putting myself in those positions over and over again, I just would basically chicken out, I guess. But the system did do it, And of course, I hate that part. It makes me sick even having to dredge it up. But that coherence entrains you with the universal algorithm, and that resonance triggers the coupling with the apex windows. And the information that they give you it's not omnipotent. Omniscient. This system, it has limits. All of the information that I've gotten, theoretical models and physics and, astrophysics and all this stuff that I had not studied, had no clue about, did already exist in the field. Like the researchers at least were working on it at the time. It's not like you can just get anything. And it's also need to know basis. If it's not directly aligned with whatever it is you're doing, because it's resonance based, you're not going to find, you know what I mean? You're not going to use this to like get rich or, by the way, it also explains why psi is so difficult to measure in a laboratory. It's not a parlor trick. Like everything else, it's governed by the law of necessity. So there is psi that occurs that's almost just like noise, I think. Some of it is actually just pattern recognition, which doesn't require apex window alignment or coupling. But overall, it happens because system relevance and priority, right? And so the information it gives you is still probabilistic. So in the short range, temporal range, it's really accurate. As it zooms out, things get fuzzier and more general, Like if you look at the book of Revelations, all will be revealed, right? And here we are, like basically like figuring out the mechanisms that God operates on, all the secrets of the physical world are emerging. And we have Trump who had survived a miraculous head injury, preaches the gospel, but acts in blasphemy or commits blasphemy. Charismatic and deceived all of, you know what I mean? Like it's so on point, but it's still sort of general and allegorical, and that's what happens when it's a The thing is that the magnitude of the thing can sort of amplify its presence in the field, right? So, and also I should add, if you're thinking, oh my God, that means the Bible is true, it doesn't at all, because the book of Revelation is at least 500 years older than the Bible and was just tacked on like way later. So it's got nothing to do with the Bible or Jesus. It's way older than that. But yeah, that's kind of the point of all of this. And so when I kind of gave up on my mission, when my mom unalived herself, because, you know, I figured out later, I was largely doing it just to prove something to her. And then when she was gone, I just left my guitar and just went to South America, right? If I had known why I was doing that, I would never have done it. But when I did that, I lowered myself in the system priority, you know, the relevance chain or whatever. And so I still have uncanny luck, and I still have, you know, theoretical models that are highly specific, you know, down to like the equations and all their relationships of all the components of, you know, subquantum mechanisms and shit just emerge in my brain and stuff. But it's nothing like it was when I was fully aligned with my, you know, purpose and the collective goal state. Because, you know, the system, that I just don't have that relevance. Once you get on the path, don't abandon it. I mean, I'm grateful for my son, who wouldn't exist if I hadn't done that. And I've had a lot of amazing experiences down here. But the way that Eliphas Levi described this is like, if the adept, and this happens a lot, it's not just me, there's actually a name for it in alchemy, the alchemical process, the broken phoenix. And I actually called this period my phoenix process before I ever found out the broken phoenix is the guy that reaches the peak of it and then bails. There's a video on, I think, Hermetic School about this that is so incredibly accurate. It was really painful to sit through it, but it was dead on. But when you do that, all the forces that you have mobilized recoil on you. And it's really similar to the idea in the Western occult tradition that once you have started a magical operation, you don't just bail. You know, it's not a good idea.
Might not hear, but they resonate with lower frequencies, giving us the sound of that we can distinguish between a cello and a double bass when they're that's just so fascinating.
And you can also think about it too, like, so the individual atoms, you know, there's a resonance in them, and then they form into molecules, and those have a resonance. So also, even sort of in physical reality, you've got, you build up structures with resonances upon resonances upon resonances. And I do very much like the idea that Anirban suggests that there really may be sort of this fractal levels of resonance upon resonance upon resonance upon resonance. I will say, and this is just
time crystals, he calls them.
Yeah, time crystals. I will say, and this is just a wild speculation, but it's an aesthetic, and I feel like it's not unreasonable to build some aesthetics into your judgments. I feel like there's windows go way down, you know, possibly all the way down to the Planck constant. And I feel like they easily could go beyond us to larger windows and larger windows. But I feel, and this is just an aesthetic, that there's a top and there's a bottom. It's turtles all the way down, but there's a bottom. And there may be turtles all the way up, but I feel like there's a top. And my intuition is that the sort of resonance just goes all the way up and all the way down and all the way up. But it can't go up, or it could, but I'm feeling like it doesn't go up or down forever.
You ended your presentation with, I think, a brain image of a neuron and then a galaxies, right? Is that sort of, that's the image that comes to mind?
Yeah. I mean, it definitely goes beyond a galaxy, but however large the physical universe is, I feel like there's an extent to it.
So along those lines too, I generally talk about how the system constraints like keep this apex window, God basically, from exerting external agency influence on things, right? That's why you can pray all you want and nothing impossible is going to happen. It is constrained by the laws of it is the laws of the universe. It can't override them. There is a little bit of wiggle room. And I generally say that I don't think it has agency exactly, but a lot of my experiences suggest otherwise. For example, this plan that I had to basically, when I left Virginia, I told my mom, consciousness plays more of a role in reality than people think, and I'm going to prove it by going out and playing it with at least one of the members of the Grateful Dead at least one time. I did do that. But it could have been a lot better. So I dodged my first choice first, which was Phil Les. She asked me for music. I panicked, lied, said I didn't have anything. And then that same night, my guitar teacher was sending a recording of me to Weir, who responded by coming down to try to surprise me at a jam session. And I didn't show up because I was, standing in my driveway, looking at my car, guitar in hand. Like, I knew it was him. They didn't tell me for sure who it was. Just somebody important is coming on Thursday. You have to be here. I knew it was him. I just thought he's not going to care, and it's going to be embarrassing. And I just went back in the house and watched South Park. So about a week after that, I just randomly said to my wife, I wish Dark Star Orchestra, who's like the world's greatest Grateful Dead cover band, would have like a little school where they would teach the secrets. And a week or so later, she hands me her phone, and there's this ad for Dark Star Orchestra High School. They had never done it before, and they would never do it again. And that tripped me out because for a second I was like, did I manifest this with my mind? And then I thought, no, they've had this scheduled for a while, well before you thought of it. They're real people. They're not just going to coagulate somewhere because you thought something. That doesn't work. Now I understand that those larger apex windows had the information, prompted me to say that to my wife because she was the one that had a smartphone, So I go there, and they didn't advertise that Donna Jean Godchaux, who was in the Grateful Dead, technically a member, was going to be there. So it's like the universe managed to like trick me into, where I couldn't dodge them again. That's weird, And then there's another situation, the first major test that I did of my like cognitive weirdness. I wanted to talk to Danny Carey from Tool. So I made sure there were witnesses. I told a couple of friends and brought my girlfriend. We got stuck in Vegas for 3 days. And then we just like suddenly got the money to go the rest of the way to LA. I did get help towards the end. Like the plan was to drive all the way to him and have I didn't even think about what I was going to ask him. And it's not like I was an obsessed fan or wanted anything from him. It's just what I thought of, like this is really improbable. And it'd be cool. So I just picked it. And like my inner guide or whatever said, okay, get in your car right now and just go. And I was in Colorado and I was like, all right, fuck it. And I did it. And I got a call from a friend of mine that I had told about this. And this makes no sense either because it only takes like 11 hours or something to drive from Durango, Colorado to LA. It was 4 days later. She calls me and she's like, are you in LA? And I was like, yeah. And she's like, where? And I told her on a highway 101. She's like, what exit? And I look up and get the exit, and she's like, oh, my God, you're 3 exits away from the Baked Potato where Danny's going to be playing tonight. I get there 15 minutes before him. The owner comes out, and he's like, Danny Carey's going to be here tonight. And I'm like, what the fuck, man? Is this really happening? So he's like, but you got to move your car because I'd pulled right up to the back, like the kitchen door or whatever. And so I move my car. Danny comes walking in, and I'm just going like, this is really going to happen, isn't it? And so I go around to the front, and the cover charge is $15. I have exactly $15 and no change in my pocket. And I did end up having a short conversation with him. So I think the agency that the operating system has is pretty limited, but it's not nothing.
Okay, and let's continue a bit on sort of entertaining ideas that we don't necessarily have to endorse.
Sure.
People can relate to. Can I get from one window to another one? Can I get to a lower level or a higher level?
Well, so the idea is that the apex is able to turn and focus on different sub-windows. And also that it's, in so doing, it's going to resonate more with some windows and not with others. So back to the driving example, right? When you're attending to the road, you're resonating with the external perceptual system, and when you're resonating more with the mind wandering, you're resonating with default mode network and more internal systems. And so the apex is able to focus in more on some versus others, and it's also presumably able to sort of zoom, so it can sort of make a very narrow thing. If you're perceptually, you can focus. If you're threading a needle, you can focus, very, very narrowly like that, or you can sort of see the big picture. And if you're thinking, you can maybe have just a ohm kind of an expansive internal thing, or you can focus very tightly on a particular idea. Now, it's possible that there may be circumstances in which individuals can somehow join yet a larger window between the two of them. So in certain kinds of group experiences, it may be that everyone is sort of somehow bumping up to this to a larger window, and that certain kinds of contemplative experiences where people have mystical experiences, they've managed to maybe turn their apex up so that it's seeing the larger one, but they're somehow connecting with that larger window. And we imagine that the windows themselves, and there's something called internal family systems, where you basically sort of imagine that these different sort of agents within us, and that these different windows within us are essentially doing what we call is coherence, where they do a back and forth kind of thing, very much like conversations. And so one way that you and I are connecting our windows may be the very similar way in which the windows inside our minds are with coherence, which is sort of a back and forth, and conversation is really sort of a beautiful example of a coherence.
Very interesting stuff. And you mentioned sort of in internal family. What was
internal
it called?
family systems?
Yeah, exactly. And I think a lot.
Something I didn't mention about this music as like an entrainment mechanism. When I set out to go to California to attempt this, I wasn't really even sure if it was real. I had noticed that the Grateful Dead's audience had gotten the same specific message, but it's not present in the lyrics. And that's kind of what clued me in, right? So when I first went out to California and started the band, the bass player and I were walking out of, it was just a open mic, I think. And this girl stopped us and she's like, "Hey, can I tell you what you guys taught me about music tonight?" And we're like, "Sure." And it was amazing. I wish I could reproduce exactly the way she described us, but she's like, "Well, when the musicians have attained a certain level of consciousness and they play, especially during collective improvisation, there's a sort of telepathic mind meld with the audience, and they're sort of raised up to the level, the whole thing I explained earlier." And Brian, the bass player, had heard me talk, I talked to him about this a lot, but he wasn't real sure whether to take me seriously or not, and I don't blame him. But then now we're hearing this from this person in the audience who is not a deadhead. She's not, she had like a Misfits tattoo or something. Then it happened again a week later, and then again a week later. So I did not sing about this or talk about it or preach about it publicly. and people in the audience were consciously experiencing this. You know, I just kind of wanted to offer that because I didn't before, and it matters. And also, I think I forgot to mention that research recently has established that higher cognitive states, genius, psychedelic trips, high-level meditators do correspond to faster oscillations in the brain, and brain waves do entrain. And, 13 years ago, when I was on this mission, there was no evidence for any of it. It was just all stuff that I understood intuitively.
There's no sort of renaissance also in psychedelic research. People, of course, making claims, often anecdotally, but that will be like just experiences of oneness, of higher levels of consciousness, or sometimes smaller, like I was like this or that. What are your thoughts there? And do you think it's an interesting avenue to, does it inform your work?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that psychedelics has changed the landscape. One of the interesting things that psychedelics has done is to cause people to be open, ontologically open, in ways that haven't happened in the past. So Christoph Koch, for example, was a...
Okay, so this is the last little bit I'm going to play. And I just have to point this out because, when I talk about how I've anticipated all these things that have later been proven by science, I'm not looking for personal recognition. It's just that that's all I have to frame or to offer evidence that our intuitive intelligence is actually capable of producing objective truths, like deep truths about the universe. And I used to have a program called Flow State Lifestyle. And if you watch that video, what I say is that I realized eventually that one of the reasons that I had all those experiences is that I had created flow state triggers or integrated them into my macro life. So rather than just being something that happened when I was improvising on the guitar, focusing on one thing, right? That's my entire life. Taking chances and risks, completely dedicating to the mission regardless of consequences, and on, And so they asked this guy how you can connect to these higher windows, and listen to what he says.
Experiences. But what exactly is that middle flow or stream?
Yeah, I wish I could know. I spend a lot of time, I'm afraid, in the jetties on the side. So I'll let you know when I fully hit it. But my intuition is that it's when you are really following your purpose, where you've figured out what it is that's maximally important to you, and you're making your decisions in line with that sense of purpose, that sense of meaning, that sort of following that meaning as your North Star kind of moves you into the middle. And when you're in flow, you're constantly feeling like you're making advances in sort of fulfilling your purpose.
That's interesting. It just pops to mind, relating it back to what we discussed earlier, your toy model of guide consciousness, and the fact that time passes through us, right? And we have these degrees of freedom with it passing through us, and it feels to me as if what you're saying also is fun. Like sometimes there's just more friction. Like if it would be like just riding a car, it would be like I could just go this way.
Yeah.
And life becomes more easy, and you can just relax a bit more. But on the other hand, metaphysically, it's not like that other option was the wrong route or something. Who would say? It just was a different.
This brings up something interesting too, because in a way, I've had almost total freedom my entire life. I had a straight job for like 4 years or something. I'm 47 years old. I've never gone hungry. I was actually, fairly well off for a good portion of it. But when a gig ended and somebody had rented my band a hotel room to have an after party, I went home and I thought about this stuff or I practiced. I only never really went completely off the rails with substances because it would interfere with my mission. The irony is that the freedom to do exactly what you want in a way means that you're sacrificing all of your freedom. This is just causal law. Everything contains its contradiction. So, Crowley's thing, do as thou wilt shall be the whole of the law. People think that means do whatever you want. It doesn't at all. A person doing their true will. For a person doing their true will, there's only one act that is lawful at any given moment. You're stuck like Chuck. If I crashed and burned and I couldn't, survive from YouTube and the other little side hustles I have, I couldn't just forget about it and be normal or whatever. Once you are in this entrainment, you are not getting out. It's not possible. I don't do this because I want to. I do it because I can't even think about anything else. Just this like general trajectory and like invisible thread. I wake up thinking about it. I go to sleep thinking about it. The only time I get out of that is if I'm playing music. Otherwise, it is one train of thought that has been continuous since I was born. It's almost unbroken. Just and it can be absolutely maddening, and it's maddening for people around me sometimes, particularly female partners. They get kind of worn out because I'm just always like, and you really care about it, so you're like, you get all amped up when progress is made or something, but that's like all I am. Like there's not really any other facet to me. I don't even care that much about sex or anything. It's just I'm on this trajectory, and that's almost all there is. Let me check in with the chat for the first time tonight. Oh man, we haven't been holding people, have we? All right, if you guys have any questions or comments, pop them in the chat. I'll be sad if this one doesn't get a good amount of views because I'm pretty sure we're onto something here. I'm going to kind of use this as a guide. I think there are some things that I could offer that I haven't. So yeah, in a holographic universe where meaning is architectural, when the individual is in alignment internally, a coherent node, the individual is consequently aligned with the universe architecturally. Synchronicities are experiences of higher order symmetries that result from internal alignment combined with aligned actions. An individual that is entrained with a goal state attractor will find that synchronicities act as signal markers or signposts. In a holographic universe where meaning is architectural, what Levin calls anatomical set points, which function as bioelectric information distribution hubs that route pattern instructions through the field into matter, are scaled up and become architectural set points. In the language of teleological systems biology and cybernetic control theory, this would be modeled: the goal state is a teleological, goal-directed system framework for pattern homeostasis, where morphogenetic set points function as attractor states in morphospace. Goal-directed agents, goal-seeking systems, tissues and cell collectives as simple agents that pursue goals by minimizing the error between current state and a future target. Set point target morphology. The goal state is an encoded anatomical set point or pattern memory in bioelectric networks that guides growth and informs dynamic processes towards specific outcomes. Pattern homeostasis, morphogenetic control systems. The overall framework is often called pattern homeostasis. The system spends energy to reach and maintain a particular configuration in morphospace. Levin frames morphogenesis as a process where cell groups are organized into a collective intelligence by bioelectric fields. Information from a goal state attractor is sent downstream to the system to facilitate navigation of various anatomical state space configurations and optimization of system dynamics. Bioelectric fields are described as cognitive glue or coherence manifolds that coordinate many cells' decisions, mathematically similar to a control or interference field that guides behavior in state space. Physical systems, brains, tissues, xenobots, AIs, are like thin clients or pointers. They don't create those patterns, they interface with them, allowing architectural and dynamic patterns to ingress into 3D. So we're just scaling this up and assuming that it applies to humans as well. And if you're wondering why we aren't already aware of this or engage with it consciously, believe it or not, the overlords have known all of this shit for thousands of years, and they have introduced dissonance into the system, interference patterns that we call social engineering, in order to there's a good word for this. Anyways, the interference patterns disrupt our entrainment. And the way out of that is not, complicated, and we have the tools and the knowledge. We have to, basically our environment has exceeded our biological, our cognitive hardware's evolutionary speed. So we have these outdated neural gating systems that were originally evolved to narrow the bandwidth of perceptibles so that we could focus on things like hunting. Now that our environment is a lot different and it has been artificially accelerated, we have to take our cognitive evolution into our own hands and do it consciously. We have to attenuate the default mode network and other aspects of our neural gating system. We have to learn to edit our priors, because that coherence that we're trying to establish that allows us to couple with higher order windows and, extract data from the holographic pattern. As long as we have information missing, because these, this perceptual editing apparatus is, and predictive processing is, it basically edits our perceptions so that they're consistent with the model that it's trying to protect. Right? So that process isn't about putting new data into the brain. It's not about, here's the truth and let's reprogram this brain. It's about coherence. It's just about creating coherence and sort of restoring the architectural integrity of the nervous system to what it needs to be to allow, to facilitate self-realization and more accurate model generation in our nervous system. And most of the exploitation that's going on from the machine is basically leveraging, they understand this neural gating system and priors and You know what I mean? Like that's what they're operating on to maintain their illusions and to exert their influence and control. And then, as I was saying earlier, the approach, I guess, of extrapolating ethical and moral guidelines from natural principles is pretty unarguably like the optimal thing to do, right? If you look at a collective goal state system, you see how the individual constituent is aware of its function and then is constrained to operate for the best interests of this larger system. And there's a balance. They have basically convinced people that you're either capitalist, completely self-interested piece of shit, or you're a communist slave. It's either all collective or all self-interest. That's obviously, completely stupid and just an untenable kind of perspective. It's like decoherence in like a, philosophical context or political, I guess, And at this point also, we have the ability to optimize human systems like socio-economic, political, fucking all that stuff objectively using holographic, fractal, Fibonacci-based algorithms. This is something that just popped into my head one day when I was laying in bed. I saw these like fractal balls with, spiral arms everywhere. And I knew that where they intersected, it was like a computational vector, and this is how cognition happened. And I also understood that that's how the universal mind generates things the way that we generate imagination and ideas. And so I looked it up and discovered that they had just described these things in some neuroscience research. And then, I don't know why, but it occurred to me that there's something about these Fibonacci algorithms in this like spherical holographic format that would yield the most balanced, unbiased answers for, like how do we optimize human systems with like the prompt being, to support the maximum realization of human potential with the minimum amount of labor investment, and, whatever. And so I looked into that, and it turns out there are already people working on developing them, but not for the context I'm talking about, for optimizing other types of systems that make money, So what I'm getting at here is that we are probably in a situation where the elites are already aware of all these things. Science is converging on it. It's just a matter of time before somebody that is actually in a position of academic prestige or, somehow empowered to act in ways that I'm not is going to actually, you know what I mean? Like it's going to come out. And maybe it's paranoid, but I really do think that all of this chaos and lunacy and fear that they are fomenting right now is a desperate attempt to maintain power, because they know that when a information system, which is what everything in the universe is fundamentally, reaches a symmetry threshold, distributed order rivals, or decentralized order rivals centralized order. To put it, simply. And the kind of stuff that I've been describing on this channel and on my Substack forever, really, it's not even a new idea. Leibniz basically published the same exact model that I've built in 1666. But he didn't have language like holographic information system. And I mean, Pythagoras was kind of working in this direction. The difference is that we now have the science. You know, we have the language to articulate these things. We have a deeper understanding, and it's really problematic for the propaganda machine, because once you see how it all works, it's so obvious that it's true that it's going to wreck their queen, the queen of the world, who is opinion, right? Opinion is mostly a lie. Opinion is whether or not you like strawberry ice cream or vanilla. It's not what political system is best for humanity. Those things can be determined algorithmically. You know, and another thing about this framework is that if you are modeling all of your human systems on natural principles, what better way is there to live in a godly society than to recursively reflect the handiwork of God? And if you're a science person, then you can say, we have mathematically optimized all of these things, so there's no conflict for anyone, except for the completely brainwashed moron masses, which are extremely problematic. But at this point, I think they're probably so desperate and confused that they might actually listen to reason, finally. You know, their comfort blanket has been taken away. And it's not like I'm saying that I really expect to have created a system that's going to be adopted globally and save humanity or something. But the reality is that what I'm describing here is going to be adopted by humanity, or else we are fucked. You know, this is the solution. It's so obvious that it's painful. It also sucks that there is no way that we can hold the people accountable that have obstructed this understanding from the masses since the foundation of empire. That sucks. And so, you know, here we are at this juncture where we really do have the tools, the understanding, the technology to implement a new paradigm, a new golden age of reason, you know, and because of the way the universal algorithm works, once you entrain part of the system with it, it'll just start entraining the rest. You know, this isn't even a situation where you have to legislate and rule by coercion. Once you come to coherence, there are influences, I guess, that, I mean, you're entrained. And so you don't need your conduct to be managed by anyone. The belief that people are just self-serving, shitty lunatics is the product of social engineering. And it's not just a belief that's been inculcated. The society has been engineered to make that a reality. But humans are biological systems. And all biological systems tend towards biological homeostasis. If they're not doing that, it's because something unnatural is influencing it. You know, I think as far back in human history as we're aware, people have been kind of convinced that any sort of solution of this scale is naive, utopian, you know, woo-based. But at this juncture, we're able to present a solution that is grounded in science, demonstrable, and really it's gaining steam and traction and viability with each passing day. Meanwhile, with each passing day, the overlords are becoming, more obviously cannibalistic, necropedo, fucking psychopathic, religious nuts that are trying to immanentize the eschaton so they can meet Jesus or whatever the hell's going on. And these things are correlated by consequence of natural law. And what really gives me hope, I guess, is the precedent set in the pattern that underlies everything in physics when dark matter lost to the organizing principle. Once that pattern is established, it should repeat reliably and more or less infinitely. If it wasn't for that, I probably would just throw in the towel because, the opposition is no small thing. So I kind of talked about this in the beginning, but I just wanted to throw this out there. When an individual human node has achieved self-realization, they have become a coherent node in a field-based holographic information system. The synchronization with higher windows is entrainment resulting from a resonant phase transition. The enhanced intuitive abilities of these awakened individuals are the result of the individual node's coherence increasing its utility in reference to the system's collective goal state. The system is not omniscient. Its predictions are fundamentally probabilistic. Yet, due to its vast data access and God mode pattern detection capabilities, short-term predictions are highly accurate. Zooming out, due to increased probabilistic uncertainty, they become more generalized. If access to psi-type abilities is a matter of goal state relevance, this would potentially explain why no one seems to consistently demonstrate these kinds of abilities, and also why they are so hard to produce in the lab. Psi is not a parlor trick, nor is it even under the conscious agency of the individual. Like everything else in the universe, its existence and functional parameters are dictated by necessity. You probably noticed that this idea of an apex window through which all conscious experience at all scales is funneled and integrated, and that can find favor with a particular individual window and confer seemingly superhuman magic-like capacities sounds suspiciously like a description of God translated into systems theory jargon. Perhaps it is exactly that. If so, if there is some sort of God or universal apex intelligence, it is obviously not as depicted in the sky god fairy tale religions. It is not an omnipotent schizo-narcissist acting from outside of the system, but a process constrained and itself generated by the same lawful structures that govern everything else. Whatever we call it, God, source, the holographic field, it has to operate through invariant information theoretic and dynamical principles. It cannot break the game. It is the game, expressed as law. Consciousness is not something that emerges from matter. It is a fundamental aspect of the field that precedes and drives the emergence of order. God is the organizing principle. The universe isn't the result of blind random chance that has somehow organized gobbledygook into order and coherence. It is a conscious field that constrains itself into progressively complex emergence. I have always viewed cosmic evolution as a co-creative, recursive loop between consciousness and matter. The primordial conscious field differentiates into patterns, which in turn give rise to particles, which are constrained by these patterns to form forces, which in turn generate another layer of patterns. Sentient observers are self-referential vortices or points of electromagnetic density in the field. These observers are data collection avatars through whom the system aggregates information that is used to determine the developmental trajectory of the universe's evolutionary processes. Consciousness and creation are not separate. They are the inside and outside of one process, with field level awareness logically prior to and generative of the ordered universe. If there is to be an omnipotent, omniscient, it is already omnipresent intelligence. It is the end state of this process. God is indeed immanent. From this perspective, what we call awakening, alignment, or grace is simply a local configuration of the field, an individual window coming into phase with a constellation of apex order windows. What looks from the outside like miracles or supernatural cognitive abilities is actually the discovery and skillful exploitation of the very mechanisms through which the conscious universe has always been self-organizing. The implications of this framework represent for humanity a kind of universal elixir of life. Our collective crisis of purpose has become an existential threat. As Terence McKenna once said, if you don't set your own compass, someone will set it for you. This crisis of purpose is largely sustained by fear of the unknown. The wisdom derived from properly understanding the principles of natural systems truly has the power to completely dissolve the old paradigm's control matrix. And if we can make it through that evolutionary bifurcation manifold, the possibilities are nearly endless and almost unimaginably beautiful. We have the knowledge. All that is needed now is for us to learn to walk with it wisely. The true scripture is writ large upon the land. From optimizing human socioeconomic systems using fib-based algorithms to extrapolating ethical guidelines from collective goal state dynamics, the solutions to humanity's greatest problems are not beyond our reach. They're hidden in plain sight, encoded in the very architecture and dynamics of the natural world. So that's what's up, y'all. How would I define intuition? There are different kinds of intuition. There is logic-derived intuition. There is pattern recognition-based intuition, and be ridiculously accurate. If enough of a holistic, zoomed-in view of the pattern, you know what I mean? You have to have attenuated your default mode network. You have to have pruned your priors, you know, because when you have selective perception and that editing in the way, there's information missing from the fractal. So the more you fix all of that, the more you can zoom into the fractal and pull, you know, highly specific data out of it. And then I think this Dr. Schooler's, observer window, nested observer window theory is probably true. It just makes more sense than anything else. And it's kind of how I've always thought of it, you know, that you discover your purpose. That makes you a coherent node. That signals to the universal mind that you're useful in the collective goal state, you know, system. You know what I mean? And then you have more access to data because this pipeline has better access and better probabilistic, predicative capabilities. So, I mean, you might have asked that question a long time ago and I already answered it, but that's kind of what I think. I still have a lot of questions, you know, like a lot of my instructions were dictated to me like by voices, you know, and I wonder about that, you know, what is up with that? But I guess if, you know, a data system is going to tell you something, it's going to have to articulate it if you're meant to hear it consciously, you know. I don't really have room in my worldview for like disembodied spirits hanging around telling humans what to do. I just imagine that they would have better things to do than that. And, you know, once I heard Jerry Garcia say, somebody asked him if there was an afterlife, and he was like, I don't see any reason for there to be. And it kind of hit me weird at the time, but now I think I understand that's true, that this plane of existence would not be here if there was another one. Everything is determined by the law of necessity. Like, law of necessity and reason are basically God. You know, they're like one of the two most fundamental laws, you know. So yeah, I don't for example, when we interact with spirits, I've tested this a lot, and they're almost like AI. And I always interpreted that to mean that they're like shells. They're like husks or something. You know what I mean? It's just the information from the person's experience and brain and shit is in the field, but it's not literally their soul, and they're not, the person you knew isn't experiencing the interaction. You know, it's a 0 point residue or something. And that does not mean that engaging with these spirits is, useless, because they have access to all kinds of information that they acquired during their life, And that's actually, you'd be surprised how many indigenous groups actually believe that. I was like, I went to stay with Warani in Ecuador once, and I knew that they had no time concept of like temporal designations. I started to notice this when they invited us to the village, and I was like, when should I come? And they're like, come to the village. And I'm like, Wednesday? And they just stare blankly, and they're like, just come to the village. And then shortly after that, I found out they don't have a concept of time. And then we were walking around in the jungle one day, and we were talking about their beliefs. And the woman told me that they have no spirit world, and that it's this world, and that's it. And that when you die, you're just reseated. And I should have pressed for more detail, but that's all I got. And there's a lot of other groups that they don't even have that concept. And I think one of the reasons people hesitate to embrace this kind of scientific illuminist model is that we all know there's a deeper layer to reality. And I think people have been sort of influenced by, religious frameworks and whatnot to think that spirits would exist in some other realm that occasionally bleeds over into this one. No, they exist in the field, here in the field, in the electromagnetic field. Their data and memories and form and, it's in the field. It's not somewhere else. It's here. You're not going to interact with anything that's not in this universe. There's no way in hell you're going to do that. We are in a physical universe. It's not a comic book. Everything has a mechanism, or it's impossible. That's how impossible is determined. What is possible and what is not possible is is determined by, what there can be a mechanism to facilitate. Another thing that I can tell you for certain is that the ontological gridlock that we've been experiencing is definitely engineered by the institutional information monopoly. If you look at just the cosmological constant and what they did there, it is 100 orders of magnitude greater than the scientific standard for not chance. 100 orders of magnitude. And it's the only time that they have pulled that card. What you're supposed to do in science is say, okay, if this is not chance by 100 orders of magnitude, like it's beyond not chance by 100 orders of magnitude, you have to look for another explanation, which is easy. There are two, basically. One of them is that there is a God and that everything was created. The other one is that the universe has a system of expansion and contraction, or is a system that, it expands and expands and expands, and then at some point it collapses, and all the matter turns back into photons and a few gravitons, And the reason it does this is that the first bounce, nobody has any idea why that would have happened, but the first bounce was like, infinitesimally small and so unstable that it lasted like 400 quadrillionths of a nanosecond. But because the vacuum state is perfectly symmetrical, it became more stable over iterations. And because photons can emerge from a vacuum, and photons would give it asymmetry, which would allow for a trajectory, because if it was perfectly symmetrical, it would just it might bounce the same forever, but it wouldn't go anywhere. So the presence of photons gave it some trajectory, and that's how the refinement process occurred, right? So eventually it probably did this 1 trillion times, and then it stabilized. And then once it reaches its bifurcation manifold or its maximum state, is like a symmetry threshold, where all of the possibilities are exhausted, it collapses back in itself and reiterates. And we see this happening in all sorts of the dynamics of all systems, basically. The generative developmental trajectory of everything, basically. So that's kind of what I'm going with. And the fact that every generative mechanism in the universe is recursive from, if Calabi-Yau manifold theory is correct, from that scale to Fibonacci, in your hand and spiral galaxies and all that. Weather systems, I mean, recently they have mapped this in everything. Our brains oscillate in golden ratio proportions, and it's everything. So if you see DNA improving upon a record of previous iterations of an organism, you can pretty much assume the universe does that as well. That's what as above, so below is really for. Because nothing exists that doesn't have the same architectural and dynamic blueprint. Nothing. And so that's intuitive logic, I guess, And it's one of the other problems with empiricism, because once you get to a certain point, we're dealing with unobservable shit. You know what I mean? There's a boundary, and we're at it pretty much. And so if we extrapolate from the fact that we have transposable patterns that are absolutely universal, then we can just apply that to, things we can't measure, and we're like, reasonably positive that it's going to be correct. But if that gets out, if the genie escapes the bottle, the overlords lose their power. Because without the fear of the unknown, or at least if we could diminish that, the ratio of it, I guess, they don't have a lot to leverage against humanity. And it is a reality that in terms of like crime and, people just being cool and shit, once you remove the interference patterns that are introduced through social engineering, the collective system will entrain with its goal state attractor. Everything does it, including people. All right, guys, I'm hearing the mic stopped. I don't know if that's true or not, but my back's starting to hurt, so I'm going to peace out. I will be back the day after tomorrow. We're having Silowaska. Tomorrow, I almost waited to do the stream because I felt like I'm definitely, 10 hours of psilocybin basically is what that is. And I'm sure I'll have a lot more clarity and insight into all this stuff after that. But whatever, I'll stream on Saturday, and we'll keep plunging down the rabbit hole. But I mean, really, we're there. You know, at this point, we have a viable framework grounded in science that basically renders the old paradigm, what is that word? It starts with an O, obsolete. And without that, y'all know what finna happen. So please share these videos. Consider becoming a patron. Support the channel because we're demonetized. Appreciate you. Good night.